Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, or good evening, wherever you are. My name is Scott Matheson, and this is the webinar on how to move to Australia. I've got two panelists with me today. One, Nazim, who specialises in immigration, and the other, Brett, who specialises in helping international candidates find jobs in Australia. So you've come to the right place. We're going to keep this as brief as possible. It's really the first step in how to move to Australia, especially after COVID, because there have been a lot of changes over the last 2 years. And hopefully by the end of this webinar, you'll have a next steps, where to go to from here, and you can sort of make a decision on whether you want to move to Australia or not. Now, we know that everybody knows about Australia. That's probably why you're on here. We're not here to tell you about the lifestyle in Australia or the cost of living, all those sorts of things. This is very much purely around how to get to Australia, how to move to Australia, how does the visa work, and how do you get a job. So I'm going to introduce you now to our panelists. Our first, born and bred in Sydney, actually born in the USA, but bred in Sydney, Nazim Lalazari, our Head of Immigration Services. Nazim.
Hi everyone, thank you for that, Scott. As introduced, my name is Nassim and I'm an Australian. I grew up in Sydney where the weather is almost always perfect, and because of that I'm a staunch New South Wales fan, and I will fight anyone from Victoria or Queensland about that. As a registered migration agent, I've helped thousands of individuals move to Australia over the last 10 years that I've been working in. I originally trained and was admitted to the bar as a solicitor in New South Wales. So I'm looking forward to talking to everyone today about how the migration process works and how you can be prepared to make that move as well. Thanks.
Fantastic. And just so you know, Nazim has been with Working In now for over a decade, and travelled to the UK and other countries, meeting people from all around the world, helping them to relocate down here. Our next panellist, Brett McAdam, has also been with Working In for many, many years. Brett is based in Sydney. Brett, if you could introduce yourself from a recruitment perspective.
Hey everyone, hi guys. So look, I'm based in Sydney. I'm originally from New Zealand. As Scott said, I've been working in for a while now. I've been in the recruitment industry for well over 10 years. I've lived overseas in countries like Ireland and the UK as well. So I definitely know what it's like to move to a new country, find a new job in a new country and go through that process. Sydney's home for me, loving the lifestyle here, great weather. And yeah, looking forward to helping some people from various parts of the world move to Australia and find a job in Australia. Needs people down here.
Needs people, all right. Fantastic. Yeah, and as I mentioned, my name is Scott Matheson. I'm the co-founder of Working In. Been helping people move down under for over 20 years now. It's what we do. It's what we love doing. And it's a really interesting situation now because over the last 2 years, so many skilled migrants have left Australia to go back to their home country. And of course, with the borders closed, there hasn't been the normal intake of skilled migrants that Australia would normally take on. Added to that, because of COVID, the Australian federal government has poured huge amounts, billions of dollars into infrastructure and growing the economy and what's going to happen post-COVID, which we're heading towards now. And so all that investment means that Australia needs people. And already we know from talking to our employers that they are desperately short of people. And that's a really good thing if you're a skilled migrant, if you're from overseas, because I would argue there has not been a better time to move to Australia in the coming 18 months because the demand for skills is so intense. So that's the background. Of course, the borders are shut right now, but the Pfizer vaccine is well into the community now, and Australia's looking to get their rates up to 90%, and at that point the borders will start to open. So I guess that being the background, where to now? What do we need to know? With Australia, there's so many variables, and I guess, Nazim, if we can start with you, if I'm not living in Australia, I'm elsewhere in the world, I've got a skill, I'm under the age limit of 45, you know, what do I do? How do I go about it? And what are the options for me?
Yeah. So I think the first thing that everyone needs to understand is that there's potentially several different options, but each of those options will have different criteria, will have different timelines, and they might have different requirements that you need to meet in order to take advantage of that process. So the first step that I always recommend is talk to someone who knows the process, speak to a registered migration agent, and get them to work out if that pathway is even for you. Can you actually migrate? So for a lot of people, they might have really good skills and they might have the desire to go, but they might not actually understand what that process looks like and what's required. And until you do, the actual migration process won't actually get started. So I talk to many people, normally very early here, because it's in the evening in the UK for most of you guys, and we can catch up. And when we talk, what's apparent is that everyone's always thought about moving to Australia, and they've always been really keen, but they haven't taken that first step. And that first step is actually finding out what those options are and getting that roadmap to Australia. Now, Australia migration can be quite complex. It's not just a case of I'm a nurse, I can move to Australia, or I'm a carpenter and I can move to Australia. There's a lot of nuance and detail that goes into finding out and qualifying, one, that you do qualify and how you get there. So I think the first step is, if you are actually interested in moving to Australia, is taking that for, doing something about it and getting your options assessed so that you've got a plan and you can take it forward from there.
Sure. And of course, we offer an eligibility assessment, which is a very simple assessment to understand a little bit more about you. And from there, we can understand whether you have a pathway or not. And when Nazim talks about pathways, some examples are, you might not meet the criteria on a federal level or on an Australia level, but you might have options on a state level. So Nazim, for example, can you just run through briefly what that state level, that state visa 189, 190 is, and how it might work, just as an example of how different visa types?
Yeah. So there's quite a few visa subclasses, as they're called in Australia, and they've all got a bunch of numbers that are associated with it. So that's part of the lingo that you hear, 189, 190. So a subclass 189 visa is one where you have an occupation that's on a particular list that allows for you to apply directly for permanent residency without having a job offer or nomination from a specific state. Now, sometimes your occupation is on one of those, is on the right list, but you might need some extra points because you don't qualify in order to be invited to apply. And so you might need a state to sponsor or nominate you, in which case you'd apply for something called the subclass 190. Now, the subclass 190 is open to more occupations because it also includes some other potential occupations that don't have that direct pathway. But different states or territories have decided, look, this is a really important skill, and we want people who have these skills to come and live and work in our state. So we're going to make the process easier for them by offering them state nomination. So that's the subclass 190.
Yeah, because some states like Western Australia have different skill requirements for, say, Victoria, for example, because there's no mining in Victoria relative to Western Australia, let's say. Yeah. So I think that's explains why it's really important to understand your particular situation first and plan your pathway first, because that's going to save you time and money, the scarcest commodities in the world. So Brett, you're sitting there, you're in Sydney, you're talking to employers every day. Can you just give our audience a summary of, what's happening in Australia? What's the employment market like? What is the job market like? How are skills needed? And, where do you sit in all this?
Yeah, definitely. So, in terms of the job market here, I think unemployment, last I read, is around sort of 4.5%. So, and as you've mentioned, I think a lot of people have returned back to their home country. A lot of people obviously can't come in, which has really affected the workforce across a number of industries. I've even seen now other industries are trying to poach people from, industries that relate to their industry, like mining have been trying to get people out of construction for example. But the construction sector down in Australia is running hot pretty much across all the states. You got the mining sector running hot. You got the construction sector running hot. They just can't find people. So they're really competing. When I'm talking to employers, from a pretty limited pool of talent down here. It's very finite resources. I talk to some employers that just about know everyone with certain skill sets in their sort of region, but they can approach, and they can only obviously approach them so many times. So we really want to hear about fresh blood, fresh people coming into the market that want to relocate down here. So as I said, you really want to find out, obviously, where your sort of skill set fits within. Obviously, going back to that visa side of things, but engineering, construction, massive civil infrastructure works happening down here. Huge cries out for healthcare workers across the board. The healthcare system's been put under quite a lot of pressure, particularly in the last sort of few months with Delta. People are coming out of retirement in the healthcare sector. Mining, WA is extremely, WA in general is extremely short of people, particularly in mining and construction. So, also a big push for the regions, outside of the major metropolitan areas, they need people out there as well. So basically it's a common theme. They're crying out for people. They're looking at the same people down here, and they're really trying to look at different ideas at the meantime, but just really looking forward to the borders reopening.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. And of course, when there's that sort of infrastructure going on, it's not just limited, of course, to the construction and the mining and the healthcare. There's IT. Australia's really trying to push itself as an IT hub. A lot of really interesting stuff going on. There's, naturally a whole lot of financial type based positions available now. So incredible shortage of auditors, for example, truck drivers. The good thing about Australia that makes it a lot more clear is that they have lists and lists of occupations, and that kind of makes it reasonably clear cut to decide your route. So, Nazim, can you there's all these different LTSSL and, MTSL routes, occupations. Can you just briefly explain those? Because I think if people are going online, there's a lot of confusion around what each of those mean.
Yeah, sure. And there literally is lots of different lists. So there's the MLTSSL that you referred to, which is the medium long-term skill shortage list. Then you've got the short-term list. Then you've got the regional lists. Then you've got the priority list. So each one has a different requirement, and it's fitting a different need for the government. So at the moment, if you're on the medium to long-term list, that basically gives you access to all the skilled visa types, whether it's a work visa or permanent residency. And then if you're on a regional list, then you might only have options in the regions of Australia, in which case you need to either have a job offer or be sponsored by one of those regional authorities in order to qualify for a visa there. And then also we've got what I just referred to, which is the priority occupation list. And so this has come about since COVID. So the Australian government identified that even though the borders were closed, they did need to let certain people into the country. And so if those individuals weren't already onshore and had an application in process that they could fast track, they would be more willing to look at those offshore that also had a job offer and met that one of those criteria. So the occupation list started off small, and then it ballooned to over just 40. I think it's 42 on there now. And it does include things like auditors, accountants, all sorts of engineers, different IT roles, different health roles, nurses. I think there's like a hospital or industrial pharmacists on there as well. So there's a whole variety of occupations that the government's identified has an immediate need that they want to move through the process a little bit faster. Even if you're not on one of those lists, you do still have a pathway. It might just be that the processing times take a wee bit longer. And I think that leads on to the next thing, which most people need to be aware of, is how long it actually takes to migrate to Australia, which is longer than everyone ever wants.
I think we can cover that off in a moment, Nazim. So yeah, interesting. For those who saw the dog in the background, I probably have to mention it. There's a dog in here, which is my dog. This is our office. We're in lockdown, so I bring the dog in She's very comfortable here. That's how we are. Yeah, she's a border collie. Anyway, I think, Brett, you mentioned something before around, the regions, and a lot of people, they have this dream of moving to Australia, moving to Sydney, having an apartment near Bondi, like Brett, by the water. But, that's not always possible because of the rules that Nazim's talking about. It can be possible in the future. So, there is this stepping stone, isn't there, Nazim, where, as Brett mentioned, there's jobs in the regions, and potentially the regions have a lower threshold for some people. And that's kind of based on what you were saying before, isn't it? That 189. But eventually, if you go through that route, you can get in. And how long do you have to stay in the region before you can actually move out back to Bondi?
Normally 3 years. So a lot of the visas have it's like a provisional visa where you start off temporarily on a temporary part of the visa, and then it becomes the permanent residence after some time. So normally 3 years.
Yeah. And our experience has shown that people who move to the regions, they think they're going to move and then they enjoy it so much, they don't. So I guess what we're saying, if you come to that point where you do your initial assessment and you find out what your pathway is, and your only route forward is through some sort of state sponsorship, and you feel as though you're being forced to go to a region, we would be saying, hey, look, be open-minded about that. It might not be your end point, and migration isn't normally A to Z straight away anyway. So there are a lot of hoops to jump through, and I think that's just one example of that. Yeah. So again, Nazim, sorry, back to you, talking about timelines. Brett, we'll come back to you there, mate. But it does take a long time, and I think right now, because of COVID, because the borders have been shut, what will be happening is that as soon as the borders are opening, is that there's going to be an unprecedented rush to move to Australia. So people will be applying in numbers that we've never seen before. And part of what we're here today to talk to you about is there's a huge amount of work that you can do prior to applying for your visa that we would be strongly recommending, if you're committed to this process, to start now. Because by the time the borders open, you want to be first in the queue. You want to be there right at the front. You don't want to be reactive and wait for the global news to say that Australia is now open and 1 million people start applying. You don't want to be in that group. You want to be in that first group. So, Nazim, I think perhaps you could explain some of the things that take a long time and some of the rationale for why you want to get started now.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, what everyone needs to understand is that the Australian government makes you go through a process before you can actually apply for that visa. So even if you wanted to, you can't until you've done some first steps, whether that's, making sure that you qualify, which is obviously, where you start. But almost everyone is going to need something called a skills assessment. So that's like the first cab off the rank if you're looking at skilled migration. Those applications can take quite a while, and not all assessing authorities offer a fast track process. So if you happen to have an occupation that doesn't have that ability to pay a bit more money and be moved to the front of the queue just to get that step done, you could be sitting and waiting in line for 3 months after you've submitted all your paperwork. So I'm not talking about the collection. You've got to do all the collection first, meet the criteria, submit it, and then wait several months. Once you've got that, you've potentially got state sponsorship applications that you need to prepare, or a whole bunch of other things, whether it's IELTS or anything else. So it's really important to understand that if you want to be in the position where you can actually submit a permanent residence application, or whichever visa subclass you're applying under, you have to do all this homework first, and you need to do all of this preparation. It's like when you want to build a house, you don't just start building. You need to have materials. You need to start with a foundation. So it's exactly the same with the visa process. And the Australian government has very carefully dictated what that looks like depending on your occupation. So the process will be slightly different for everyone. But in almost all cases, you're going to need your documents, and you'll need copies of things that you might have either not kept or I do come across people who, in their pursuit of privacy, shred documents, which means that they have to then go through the process of paying for and obtaining copies again from different government authorities. And at the moment, that's taking a wee bit longer than it used to, because of the fact that with COVID and lockdowns and sort of rolling resources around the world, you can't just pick up the phone and request something straight away. You might need to go through a process, and sometimes you need to wait a few weeks just to get a copy of a university transcript. So there's all these other considerations as well to get prepared to then apply for the visa.
Okay, so let's say one of the people out here, one of our audience, they apply for their visa and they go through a process. Brett, at some point, you'll be wanting to talk to these people to assist them with a potential job. Now, Australian employers, depending on your skill set, are interested in talking to people, even if you don't have your visa. If they know that you're committed to a process, then a lot of people will wait. I mean, probably the same in your country. I can see we've got people in the UK, Ireland, USA, Canada, Singapore, lots of people here from different countries. All of those countries have shortages in, let's say, healthcare. So therefore, if, Brett, you're talking to a nurse and they don't have a visa yet, your clients will, your employers will want to initiate a conversation. So can you just take me through what you do and how you can help the audience in your role in the business?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, my role is quite simply to connect employers to international talent that's moving to Australia as early on in the process as possible. So basically, I'm always talking to employers across a number of industries, and they come to me with jobs and they say, hey, we can't find people locally for these positions. We're very keen to talk to people that are moving to Australia, and really connect the dots with people that are moving down from offshore that are either about to start the visa process or in the visa process and making that journey down, and really matching those, what the candidate's looking for. So, when I'm talking to candidates, we want people to have a clear idea of where in Australia they want to live. It's a massive country. Do you want to live in the region? So, how open-minded are you to hearing about different opportunities you might not have thought of? And that's basically one of the big areas, where do you want to go? What type of employee do you want to work for? Where fits for you? What type of environment you're looking for? Obviously a lot of people want to work a lot more from home. So it's really just sort of matching up, what you're looking for when you're moving down from an employer to what our employers that we're working with have to offer. And then maybe even getting you to look at a few options that might be not what you thought of. So running those sort of options by you. And one of the big things we do say to people as well, if you're looking to move down, things you don't want to do is just spray your CV out across, the job boards. That's just not the way to go about it. You need to have a strategy in place. You need to think, do your research. Where do you want to live in Australia? What type of employee do you want to work for? What's important for you in your next job and working down here in your career? Tell us about that. And then we'll look at the employers that we're working with and who we can sort of match you up with, and maybe even run some other ideas by you as well.
Yeah, look, it's a good point, isn't it, Brett? Is that the majority of employers in Australia won't look at a CV that's an international CV.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
If you're out there now and you've already started applying for jobs and you're not getting any replies, or you're just getting automatic declines, to be brutally frank, it is because you're an international candidate, and that's in the too hard basket. And look, even in normal times, it's in the too hard basket. So part of the work that Brett does would be saying, well, if you're matched to this job, normally you'd apply to it and they wouldn't look at your CV. As a local, we'll come in and we'll make a call and we'll get in front of that employer for you and explain your situation. You're committed to a visa process. You're going to be down here at this time. This is what you're looking for, and this is why you should be considered alongside local people for that particular role. And that's really hard to conduct by yourself. So as an independent third party who is known to employers, we can position yourself in a way that it would be very challenging for you to position yourself. So Nazim mentioned that there's different visas. Some you don't even need a job, but most people do require a job just to cash flow themselves. So even if you're on the permanent residency, no job, that's important. However, some of you will need a job offer to get into Australia, especially now. And Nazim, that's the common pathway is the 482 visa, the temporary visa. Can you just explain that for those people who don't meet immediate residency criteria and will need to come down on what I'd call a job-led type visa? Can you just explain how that works?
Yeah. So the subclass 482 is effectively an employer-sponsored work visa. So you need to have an occupation that's either on the MLTSSL or the STSOL, which is basically the short-term or the medium to long-term. Now, these visas can be issued for either up to 2 years or up to 4 years, depending on your occupation and the type of employer as well. So there's no age limit for temporary visas, which is good to know for some people, because they sometimes people are worried, oh, if I don't qualify for PR, can I also just go to Australia and work, on a temporary basis? Yes, you can. So these visas will be issued for either up to 2 or up to 4 years, and they're renewable potentially as well, depending on your occupation. And so for lots of people, it's a way to gain extra work experience in Australia, and also then potentially additional points towards their general skilled migration under the 189, 190. Also, sometimes, depending on your occupation, you might have an employer who's willing to sponsor you directly based on the job offer once you're in Australia, if you've worked for them for 3 years. There are other pathways. Generally, however, the process is that most employers tend to prefer that an individual qualifies for permanent residency under their own accord, because it's a little bit less pressure or obligation from them. And also, you've got the other situation where employees do want to support you, but for various reasons, the company doesn't qualify to do so. So there's lots of different visa options, whether they're temporary or permanent. Normally, people want us to assess their permanent residency options, because we appreciate that Australia is a wee bit far from the rest of the world. And if people are moving down there, they want to know that they can stay there indefinitely.
So that's interesting. And I think, Brett, because of the 482 visa, people are looking to get a 482, they need to get a job offer. In order to get a job offer, you need to apply for the job. Very challenging to apply from a job offshore, and try and work with the employer who's going to, and encourage them to offer you a 482 temporary visa. They're going to just look at the local market and put you in the too hard basket. So once again, what our model is if you're a highly skilled person, but you don't meet residency, you could potentially come in on a temporary visa first. Brett may be able to open some doors. In an ideal world, get you a job offer, then you can apply for your temporary visa, and then down the line, maybe get residency. So look, we're not promising stuff here. Obviously, this is just theory, but what we can say is the 482, then the employer-nominated scheme residency route, has been in the past an extremely popular route for people to gain residency in New Zealand. And I mean, extremely popular. Hundreds of thousands of people have taken that route to get their, did I just say New Zealand? I think I did, to get their residency for Australia. So I think that we're kind of coming to a wrap-up time. We've been almost half an hour. I should have said right at the beginning, if you had any questions, put them in there and then we can respond. What is next? I think the very next part of this process, if you're interested in working with us a little bit further, is to complete our initial assessment. It's a very simple online assessment. That'll make it clear to us whether you have a chance or you don't have a chance. One of the reasons why I had New Zealand in my head is that a lot of people who are applying are around that 45 age bracket. Now, unfortunately, in Australia, the cutoff for residency is 45. However, the cutoff for New Zealand is 55. So one of the things that we've been talking about with people who don't meet their Australian age limit is, would they consider New Zealand as well? So these are the sort of options that we kind of push back on you to say, hey, listen, you can't do this route, you can't do that route, but you can come here. You can't go to Sydney, but you can go to Darwin, or you can't go to Sydney, you can't go to Darwin, but you can go to New Zealand. And this is how that works. So, look, really, our view, we've been doing this for 20 years, is we don't want to waste anybody's time or anybody's money, and be very, very wary of people who promise you everything without understanding you in depth. There's a huge amount of information and so many variables around this that you need to get it 100% correct with a MARA agent like Nazim or any other MARA agents you might have. But it's very important that you're dealing with somebody who is government certified and you're protected with that advice. And actually, on that note, Nazim, it's probably really worth just describing in a little bit more detail what a MARA agent is. I think it would be quite helpful.
Yeah, sure. So a MARA agent is basically a registered migration agent that's been given the permission in order to provide Australian immigration advice through the office of the OMARA. Basically, it's a government entity that we have to apply to every year to show that we are still fit and legally able to provide advice and assistance. So because we're obviously governed by a government authority, if we do anything wrong, we're also sanctioned and they can come after us. So that's why you would use someone like a registered migration agent. So all registered migration agents will tell you that they're registered migration agents, and they'll provide their MAN number to show that they have the legal ability and the authority to provide you with advice.
Yeah, and there's quite a lot of protection around that, especially with people's money when they're, this is a once in a lifetime sort of process for most of you. Not many people migrate twice. You're talking to people like us and you're like, oh, is this what's right and what's wrong? The good thing about Australia is that when you are depositing funds into a registered agent's account, then that money actually goes into a fund, and that is secure until such time as the work is actually carried out. So you are protected. Do you have anything to add to that, Nazim, that describes it?
So that's pretty much bang on the money. And it does, we have found that it does help to use migration agents that are based sort of in countries where the government will help the Australian authorities with doing the right thing. Those that are sometimes overseas do the wrong thing, and then it's hard for the Australian government to go after them because they don't always have the legal ability to persecute them outside of Australia. So, yeah.
Prosecute.
Sorry,
yeah.
Prosecute.
Brett, just one final word from you. In terms of what people can do in preparation for a job search, what would you be recommending? What do employers like to see on people's CVs, for example? And what can they anticipate once they actually connect with an employer?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in terms of your CVs, I guess the biggest thing people want to see is your most recent 5 to 7 years of experience. That basic stuff, dates of employment, where you've worked, depending on your role you've been in, your duties in that role, but any achievements as well is really big for employers in Australia. They don't want to know what you just turned up and did on the job, but they want to know what you achieved in that role. Depending on where you're going and what industry you're in, is quite a big one. So have that all sort of lined up. Some people also say, obviously, the company you've worked for overseas won't be so well known in Australia. Doesn't hurt to have perhaps a link to that company that you've worked in the last sort of 5, 7 years where you've worked, so they can have a look at that as well and see how it compares to where they are. In terms of once you get that first step into interviews, it's obviously going to be probably an online interview on Zoom. It's the world we live in right now, so we all know the ins and outs of having all that sorted. But it can be quite formal. It depends on the company, but typically it will be quite formal. There's a bit of an investment in time and money from them. If you go offshore, so you want to do your research going in, why you want to work there. You've done your research as to that company, where you're going in Australia, why you want to go there as well. So they will be looking for that side of things. Not only are you capable of doing a job, but why do you want to work for that particular company, and why do you want to move to Australia, and where they are in Australia as well. So do your research once you get that opportunity for an interview.
Yeah, look, good points. And let's not forget that those occupations, this is important, that are on the PIMSOL list, of which I think there are 42, you may qualify for a border exemption. You may be able to come to Australia sooner than later, which puts you right to the very front of the list. And so, I encourage you to complete that form to see whether you qualify for that, because if you're very keen to get out of your country where you are now, then you have a very small window to be at the front of the queue, which is quite amazing, really. Okay, look, and on that kind of note, we've sort of danced around the whole COVID issue, but we're not here to advise people on vaccinations or no vaccinations, but I think there is a certain inevitability that if you are wanting to move to Australia, then there will be a requirement to see your vaccine history. This potentially is the way of the world, whether you agree with it or not. It just does appear that both the Australian and the New Zealand governments are heading towards putting in precautions to ensure that people who are coming through the border will have a double vaccination. That's the world we live in, right? So listen, I need to wrap this up. I've taken up a lot of your time already. I hope it's been valuable. As I said right at the beginning, this is the first step. Migration is a long journey. We're here to really solidify that in your plans and to make sure that you don't waste time and money going forward if you can't or if you don't want to. If you do and you fill out that eligibility assessment online, that'll give you clarity, and clarity is what you need in this particular point in time. If you're committed to migration, it's hard yards. It's going to be annoying. Nazim will always tell you that. We need to get documents that you're thinking, why do I need all this sort of stuff? It's very admin heavy, but trudge through it. You get to the end, and then you can live, down the road from Brett and go to the beach every day.
Coogee Beach.
Yeah, Coogee Beach. All right. So I think that's it from us. Once again, thank you for joining us from all over the world. Hope it's been useful, and hopefully we'll see you down under. Goodbye. See you.